Oopsie doopsie, present now. Okay, Chris, I'm gonna rely on you. You can see this?
Yep, I can see that, and I'm gonna monitor the chat in case anyone pipes in here.
Okay, awesome. So what we'll do, guys, is this presentation has two parts to it. The first part is more focused on high-level strategy, how you get going and actually thinking about your prospecting, more thinking about your customer, thinking about the market as it stands today. We're going to go over an agenda. And then we have actually really lucky to have Chris here because we're going to get a technical deep dive into actionable techniques that you can actually use to begin prospecting. So I know the title on Ryerson Startup School is a little bit different from this, but I like to, and Chris and I like to call this presentation the human side of prospecting, because ultimately that's what sales is. It's just being a human being. So a little bit about me, guys. I will quickly pull this in. I have over 10 years in sales, both in executive leadership management and also as an individual contributor. Currently, I'm running my own startup as a partner of the Chief Revenue Officer. We're a mobile application for scavenger hunts called Goose Chase with over $2 million in revenue. I'm responsible for customer success, marketing, sales, and everything that falls in between those groups like operations. I play for the Canadian beach soccer team. I've run an Ironman and I'm a competitive long distance endurance athlete. I also consider myself quite emotional and, of course, a future Maple Leafs Stanley Cup parade participant. Chris, if you want to give a quick intro of yourself.
Definitely. Thanks, Al. And Cleo, yes, I was here 2 years ago, but I took last year off. I was traveling with my brother, so I chose travel with my brother over the startup school. So apologies, everybody, but I'm here this year. I'm super excited. So a little bit about me. This is me on the right here in a tube in my condo pool. I've been in sales for about 8 years. I've been both an individual contributor, carrying a bag. I've just recently moved into a management position. I'm loving it. So right now I work at a company called leveljump.io. For anyone who is a Ryerson student, you're probably familiar with the digital media zone. So we were incubated there for a couple years. We recently moved out. I'm a director of sales there. We're a sales training and sales enablement platform. I can actually tell you a little bit about that later in the presentation. Before that, I was at a company called Salesforce. If you're not familiar with Salesforce, this is a customer relationship management tool. I was working mostly with startups. I've also been a startup founder myself. So I ran a company called Avuvo. We were a 3D printing marketplace. That was also incubated at the Digital Media Zone. So for all you aspiring entrepreneurs, if you're looking for somewhere to house and grow and develop your business, look towards the Digital Media Zone because it is an incredible experience. Al, if you hit the arrow key a little bit more, there's a couple more points. We also won the 25K Slate business plan competition. I think that's still around. So, if you guys have business plans or lean model canvases drafted up, submit them to the Slate business plan competition because super impactful experience for me. A little bit about me personally. I've never run an Ironman. I'm not on the Canada Beach soccer team, but I do play the guitar. So that is my fun little fact here. Al, that's it for me. I'll kick it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So fun story about Chris and I and how we kind of have a relationship. Chris and I went to university together. After university, Chris and I both worked at Canon together selling photocopiers. Then we both worked at Salesforce together. Then we both worked at a startup called Flashstock together where we went through an acquisition. And then we actually moved to work for another startup, both in tandem. So we've been working together and been friends for a really long time. And we're such good friends that I've trusted Chris to try to teach me guitar. It's not going that great for me personally. Not that he's a bad teacher, because he's quite good. I'm just not musical, which is why you didn't see that on my slide.
Well, it's hard with quarantine to do those lessons. So.
Fair. So I want to pause and I want to revisit as you guys look at Chris in his hotel condo on the right-hand side there, little floaty bear. I want to revisit that story that I told you guys at the beginning of the presentation in discussion about your Google search on how to get to work early. Of all of the options that you might see on getting to work early, you might see things like go to bed early. You might see wake up earlier. You might see change your nutrition. You might see get a bike. You might see get a motorbike. One of the options you might see is get a car. And that option, for the sake of this story, let's just say, is one that interests you. So I want you guys to imagine now that it's in your mind that you are thinking of purchasing a car. I want you to think about the different ways that you might go about moving through that process. For most people in today's society, it's not that much different. So you typically start Googling car manufacturers. You start looking at feature sets that you like, whether that's online, talking to your parents, talking to your friends. Maybe you start to think about what cars your friends have or what cars your parents have, what cars are from your childhood, and begin to imagine yourself driving that car. And so you start to look up dealerships. You might go on Auto Trader. You might go to specific websites of cars. You might start Googling car images. You might start reading Black Book reviews. But overall, you're going to be able to come to some sort of narrowed down solution of what 2 or 3 brand manufacturers and possibly car makes that you really like that you'd like to purchase. You might have somebody that helps you with that, but ultimately you're going to come to that decision. After that, most people are going to contact the dealership. They're going to go for a meeting, but that meeting is typically going to be structured around one thing. And if this was an interactive presentation, I'd ask everybody what that was. Everybody's thinking it's a test drive. So at this point, you're going for a test drive of that car. You're probably asking some pretty pointed questions. The dealership is presenting you with a price offer, which chances are you probably already know the amount the car costs, and you probably have a good understanding of what the cheapest options on the market are based on your research, and you have an idea of what the most expensive options are, whether that's loaded with features, whether it's a used car, whether it's a new car. You kind of have all of that information at your fingertips. So you leave with the price, and you might go back to visit the dealership one more time to negotiate and ultimately sign the paperwork and then pay for the car. So why do I tell you all about that story? And let me get through here. Why I tell you all that story is because I want to talk to you today about today's customer, the customer journey, knowing your customer, and then diving more into practical techniques and technology to consider more with Chris. Chris, if you want to quickly go over your agenda as well. If you're still on mute, Chris.
Thanks, buddy. I was muted there. So for today, I'm going to be talking about more practical use cases. So I find that Alishan is excellent at the theory of sales, and I like to spend my time sharing practical examples. So there's entire university curriculums dedicated to how to sell better. And because I only have 3 hours here, what I'm going to focus on is just giving you a couple tips on how to book meetings with people who you don't know or who don't know your potential company. And then 2 tips for having better conversations when you book those meetings. We at my company, we use a software that records every sales conversation we have. So I'm going to actually show you some live examples of what customers are saying to me on the phone when I use these tips I'm going to be showing to you. And then we're going to finish it off with a couple of takeaways and ways that you can go about self-educating yourself on sales and implementing some of these techniques into your own startups as you grow.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. As a way to try to inject a little bit of interaction and engagement into this presentation, for my part of the presentation, if you guys have questions, please type them into the chat. Chris will kind of pause the presentation and moderate those questions so that we can kind of answer them as they're contextually relevant. And then same thing, when we flip over, I'll be moderating the chat, and I'll pause Chris's talk tracks. We'll give each other opportunities to be able to jump in and see if there are any questions so that we can make sure that we're focusing on the question as it's relevant to what we're talking about. So you remember the car story. We've purchased our beautiful new car. And what was the point of me telling you all of that? And the reason that I tell you all that is because of this simple reason, in that today, and this study is actually from 2013, so the updated version actually shows an even higher percentage, but today, customers are actually 60 to 70% through a sales process before they ever engage a salesperson. That is a pretty powerful number, especially because most people predict that that's actually closer to 75 to 80% now. And if we talk about that in a different way, what we're saying essentially is that people already know what they want to buy before they ever talk to anybody about actually buying it. They have all of the education available to them. They have all of the resources available to them to be able to move through that before ever coming to a salesperson with a decision or with a conversation or questions that they have. So if we think about the different ways that people have the ability to gain information, most people just think it's Google or talking to friends, but there's a plethora of ways that people gather information quickly through Twitter, through programs like Mention. Facebook is actually still a really good source of information. Instagram informs us about social trends and norms. And then, of course, LinkedIn is a more professional way to actually recruit information on not only business-based products, but also consumer-oriented products as well. So today's customer is more educated than ever before, has so many resources available, as we can see, and already has formed opinions and a point of view before ever coming to speak to a salesperson. So this is the slide, right? If that's the case, then let's just panic, wipe our hands, throw our blend up there, and see what happens. But I don't think it's time to panic yet. There's still hope. So what I want to talk about is the buyer journey. And a buyer journey is essentially something that every single one of us goes through every single time we buy anything, any single time we decide to make a purchase, whether it's a product or a service. Now, a buyer journey can be simple. 3 stages: awareness, consideration, decision. And a good example of that would be, think of yourself having a sore throat or a fever. You're like, oh my God, I'm achy all over. What's wrong with me? You're like, oh, maybe I have strep throat. Okay, well, what are my options for relieving or curing my symptoms? Well, I can see the primary care physician. I can go to the ER room, or I can even go to perhaps over-the-counter medicine. Well, the ER costs a lot and I have insurance. My health is important, so off I go. They can be a little bit more complex, where we're looking at more of this through a tech journey, where somebody is attracting you possibly through, let's just say, an Instagram ad, blogs, website, content, press releases, video, social media. So more classic forms of advertisement, converting you through online signups or landing pages or call to action like, hey, come to our website, enter this coupon code, get 50% off. After that, they're moving you through to the close stage, which is more like closing the deal, getting you to purchase more, and then ultimately delight, which is focused on retention, premium content associated with what are your interests in that process, and then moving you through. Now, for me, these last 2 buyer journeys are a little bit too rudimentary. I don't think they capture the complexity and all of the mini steps that many of us as individuals go through when we consider a buyer journey. So this is what I feel is more representative of what everybody goes through today. So first, in pre-awareness, we need to be aware that there's a problem. So for startups and thinking about your customers, you need to make them aware that they have a problem, because let's face it, a lot of the businesses that we run and that we start as entrepreneurs is businesses that are new to the marketplace, addressing a problem that people haven't previously thought of as a problem in that way. They're used to doing things in a certain way. If we go back to the car example, before the invention of the car, people are using horses, just as an example, or even bicycles. They have no understanding that they have a problem that they can't get somewhere faster. So we as a company need to make them aware that the problem exists in detail and show them why it's actually a problem. Once we do that, we can kind of get to that place of awareness. So now they know that there's a problem and they consider it big enough to want to solve it. Now we can start the solution around it. Okay, I know I need to get somewhere faster. Motorbikes don't exist yet. So am I going to be looking at a car? Obviously, that is a bad joke, especially to the silence of this presentation, but it still gets the point across. Once people are aware that there are solutions to solve the problem that they now know exists, they can start to go out and look for more information. How does this work? How will it help me? What's my unique process in actually gaining this information to make sure that I want to move forward in considering this as something that will actually solve that problem, or consider it as something that is an investment that I want to make? So now I'm at the emotional stage. I want to look at case studies, testimonials, client stories. I want to talk to my friends, my family. I really want to get a feeling for Is this something that I'm going to connect with? After that, I can start to move through to my justification stage, which is price comparison, charts, features, really that logical, does this make sense? Does this emotional decision make sense against all of the different logical triggers that I typically use to determine whether or not a purchase makes sense? Finally, it's the purchase, just the facts. Shipping, tax, return policies, guarantees. Give me comfort that I'm working with a good vendor that understands that if something goes wrong, I'll have the ability to come back to them and they'll rectify it. After the purchase is done, we go into a post-purchase phase. Post-purchase is all about reworking your customer through that buyer journey. Now, depending on the type of company you are and the number of products you have, or the different markets you serve, your customers may go through all of these stages, or they may go through a few of these stages. But ultimately, every single buying journey goes through a buying cycle. And generally, no matter how quick the buying cycle is or how quick the stage is, this occurs in every purchase. I want to pause there quick and see if there's any comments or questions, Chris. And Chris, you might be muted.
Yeah, no, I'm not seeing any relevant questions. It's mostly just where's the slide deck and stuff.
Okay, cool. So thanks for that. So I just want to highlight this example in a more simple way, because I think, abstract and theory can be a little bit challenging to grasp when it's a first time concept. And I want you guys to think of another story. Chris has probably heard me tell this a million times, and it's just really relevant. So let's just say you guys are walking past your favorite store in the mall, and I want everybody to kind of visualize walking past their favorite store. The mall's teeming, it's busy. You can be close to people. Another bad joke, sorry. And you walk into your favorite store, you see a jacket on the rack that you like, it catches you as you're walking by, you pick it up, you walk to the cash register, and you purchase that jacket. Now, in that case, you've gone through all these stages of the buying cycle extremely quickly, right? You realize that, hey, I didn't know that I needed a black jacket. Oh, there's a black jacket that could possibly solve this. This clearly works like any other black jacket. I'm emotionally attached because I think this is beautiful. The logic stage is really interesting in a purchase like this because it's actually happening between you picking up the jacket and moving to the cash register. You're justifying your purchase to yourself in that, I love the buttons on this. I don't have a jacket like this. Am I really ever going to see something like this again? So I better not take a look or take a chance. I'm just going to go buy it. Whatever those processes are that you go through in your own mind to justify purchasing it. And then the purchase, well, you're already familiar with this vendor. They're your favorite store. You know they have a great return policy, a solid guarantee and workmanship on their product. So you're fine with the facts. And post-purchase, you made the right decision because you're going to be wearing it. There might be a coupon code or a scratch and save at the counter that you're used to getting from this vendor, whatever that is. That's just a short example of even a purchase as quick and as painless and as simple as that. You always go through the buying stages, the buying cycle, 7 stages.
Hey, Al, before you jump off, we got a question about the consideration stage.
Sure.
So, what if you're a new company and you have no testimonials or no case studies just yet? How do they create that emotional connection with the buyer in the consideration stage without any real assets?
Yeah, good question. So this can happen in a couple of different ways, right? You can always use customer references at this stage of the game. Essentially, people want to know that other people have invested in the same way. Now, if you're a brand new company and you don't have any customers, chances are you're giving your product away for free. And the emotional stage consideration is that somebody's willing to commit with you. They might have a personal relationship with you. They might have a belief in your company. So it's a very solid question, and it definitely depends on the stage of the company, but there always is an opportunity to create that emotional purchase. Did you want to add anything to that, Chris?
Nope, I thought that was a good answer, but as you're typing or as you're responding, there is another question here. There's actually a couple now. So would you structure a sales presentation in this fashion? I think maybe, Yassine, we can table that for just a moment because that kind of comes towards later. But Al, to the second part of Yassine's question is, what part of this process should be filled by marketing versus sales?
Good question. So I'm not sure if the presentation really covers that, but I think, to answer that question, I don't think that today, based on the way that we see the buying cycle happening, that we should be thinking about things as sales and marketing and support. And we should really consider using more holistic terminology. And the word that I choose, and the reason that I'm the chief revenue officer and responsible for all those things, is because they're very blurred in terms of the lines that each division accompanies. For example, if we think about marketing, people traditionally think about marketing at the beginning stages. Advertisements for early stage buyers where you're just getting somebody familiar or allowing them to see that you exist as a problem. However, if we go a little bit further, once you're in the emotional stage and somebody's asking a sales representative, hey, do you guys have any testimonials or client studies or blog articles? Oftentimes that material is actually created by marketing. So you can start to see that it's not really thinking about this in terms of sales and marketing, but thinking about it in terms of the entire customer journey and how every member of your team is an important aspect of all of that. In the pre-awareness stage, somebody might have a question that can't be answered by an advertisement. So they might reach out to your company and ask, hey, just had this quick inquiry, what do you think? Now, they might not absolutely be ready to get into that interest and education stage, but that answer needs to come from a salesperson. In terms of support, you're consistently weaved through this process when you already have customers that have made a first-time purchase. So it's an interesting question. I believe you said Yassine, but I think the answer is not as straightforward as this should be sales, this should be marketing. I think we should be really looking at business and really the funnel as a revenue funnel, not a sales and marketing funnel. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yep, she says makes a lot of sense, and thanks. But we got a couple more here about the buying cycle. Okay. So Wilson's asking, would some items under the post-purchase stage also consist of repurchasing, reorder, and customer loyalty or retention?
Yeah, so repurchase, customer loyalty, retention. Sorry, guys. Let me decline that. Oh, lost you. Sorry about that.
Eu tava.
Okay, gotcha.
Não ia chegar nada por um tempo. Então eu falei para eles olharem no longo.
There we go. Okay.
Do you mind just asking that question one more time for me?
Yeah. Where is it? Okay, so would some items under the post-purchase stage also consist of repurchasing, reorder, and customer loyalty or retention?
Yes, absolutely. So customer loyalty and retention is definitely under post-purchase. Repurchase, reorder, I would actually say that those go back into the buying cycle and you're moving people through. So if somebody's considering repurchasing or reordering, it's likely that they have identified that the first purchase didn't solve the problem for them. So they're interested in continuing to purchase more to solve something else that they're looking to do. So it depends on whether or not you're a commodity or a SaaS or you have multiple products, but in terms of where they land in the buying cycle. But I would say that customer loyalty, delight and surprise, definitely in post-purchase because that's reassurance. But I would say that post-purchase should actually be extended depending on who you are as a business to include repurchase under awareness or possibly interest education. And then you can kind of see that, that little arrow moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Excellent answer. Wilson says, thanks for your insights. So there's another couple of questions here, Al. Jason Palmer says, he's had a prospect tell him, what you have is great. I understand it, but we're so big that no matter what we do, we'll be successful. Where does that exchange fit into the buying cycle here?
Well, I would love to take it up. That's a really good question because it's a great question to start a debate. A company that's saying, or a prospect that's saying, no matter what we do, we'll succeed. Really, they're just being polite and brushing you off. And I don't mean to be blunt, but ultimately, you have not done a good job of showing the person that that pain that you solve is a big enough problem for them to consider evaluating your solution. And that's really important. They don't see that as a game changer, or they don't see it as a priority to continue down the path working with you, and they're being polite in brushing you off. That's a vague objection intentionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that probably comes down to the ability to uncover that pain in that first meeting. So Jason, hopefully that helps. Yep, he says thanks. Last question here for you, Al. So how can you determine, and this is from Ashley, how can you determine where the breakdown is in this buying cycle with potential clients? So let's say you've got clients who are coming to your website, but maybe they're not converting on your lead form, or they're not converting to purchase. How do we determine where customers are falling off in this buying cycle?
Yeah, the best way to do that is to talk to them, right? I mean, there's no silver bullet to these types of things. You have to put in the work. As a company, we're constantly asking our customers, asking our prospects to provide us feedback, to give us information on their experience, ways that they think that they would like to see things improving, because that's really the only way to understand. I mean, you can absolutely use data. For example, if you have, let's just say, five sales stages, and you notice that at one stage you're getting an 80% drop off in terms of your conversion from stage to stage, that will probably give you a good indication of, hey, I need to fix this. But even that high level data isn't enough of a specific metric for you to understand what to fix. So if you, for example, let's just say, notice that everybody's dropping off at that emotional stage, they're not moving forward to justification, to logic. That's good. I mean, it's absolutely great that you're aware of that, but you need more. You need to understand, why aren't people connecting with my product or with my service emotionally enough to want to move forward? And the only way to really understand that is to ask your customers and look for specific patterns so that you can make fixes. Now, there's also the opportunity to hypothesize and kind of A/B test stuff, but oftentimes those things take time. They need a fairly big audience, and you really have to be okay with failing multiple times, which, frankly, not a lot of companies have that amount of money and that amount of time to be able to do that. So get on the phone, talk to people, ask questions, and be okay having your feelings hurt, I would say. Chris, how would you add on that?
No, I think you nailed it. I think it comes down to having a volume of visitors and maybe like heat mapping what they're doing on the website. But ultimately, you'll never know until you actually speak to your buyers. So that's why I think it's so important to do those customer interviews, whether they're current customers, churned customers, or customers who didn't buy.
Absolutely. You can use, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, we got one more question, but it sounds like you're going to add on to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can always use tools like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms to kind of collect data and aggregate it and do some analysis on it. But there's nothing more powerful than actually talking to somebody and hearing, at what points do they inflect on? What are they passionate about? What do they really like? What do they really not like? And opening yourself up to receiving honest feedback about where your product falls down or where your process falls down is the best way to learn. If anybody's really interested, the founders of Airbnb, Ryan Chesky, did a very, very honest podcast, Startup Growth, I believe. I think it's the first podcast with Reed Richardson, one of the investors at LinkedIn. And they talk a lot about that, just making sure that they were in front of their customers. And that really stuck with me. And I think that's been a very common theme for a lot of really successful startups.
Cool. We got one last question here. So Jen, the emotional stage is usually overlooked by financial institutions. What would your recommendation be to incorporate a more sympathetic way of reaching customers when it comes to building trust with clients? John, I'm actually going to touch a little bit on that, Jen, around building trust with potential customers. But Al, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say, that is a very specific, it's a niche question to the person you're selling to, the size of the institution, and really understanding your buyer. That's super key. Is what do they care about? A lot of people think the best way to explain this is at the emotional stage, it's really about what the person you're selling to cares about for themselves. Oftentimes people go into, and Chris, you can definitely attest to this as well, people think about selling in terms of ROI as being emotional. ROI is very logical. Because if you do this, you will save this, and that makes sense for you to purchase, is really good on paper. But in theory, people are emotional buyers. They are carnal. They are buying not often based on that reason. They're buying mostly based on the fact that it feels right. The logic is just used to justify the feeling. And I bet you every single one of you guys can sit there and think of a time where, you know, possibly arguing with your partner or with your parents or with your siblings or with your friends, and you're just like, you know what, I know you're right, but I don't care. I'm going to dig my heels in and I'm going to just ride this argument out because I will not listen to reason. And that's not very far away from your buyers. So it really is taking the time to understand what those people care about. You know, do they care about their metrics, what they're measured on? So if that's the case, how do you speak to that? Do they care about the company's bottom line? How do you speak to that? Do they care about looking good in front of their boss? How do you speak to that? So taking the time to build those personas and really making sure you understand is the best way to evoke that emotional thing. Cool. So I appreciate all the questions.
I'm just gonna mute Ed here. How that's it for questions. We can jump off there.
Perfect. So thanks for all the questions, guys. We'll keep going here. So there's a but. Fat Batman or Fat Man, he's sad, he's happy, he's emotional. Yeah, the reason I have this slide here is because I wanted to kind of touch on that last point, is that buyers are emotional, they're carnal, they buy from the id. You know, that is a very, you know, it's almost an innate sexual process. Buying, it makes us feel good. It evokes emotions in us that we actually really enjoy. So again, we go back to that panic mode. So I've, you know, built all this buyer journeys and I've kind of learned all this stuff, but you're just telling me that people buy emotionally. So I guess it's time for me to start panicking again. And it's not. The key is to, again, going back to what we just talked about, know your customer. You must be where your customers are. And what I mean by that is you need to understand your customers better than they understand themselves and their buying habits. So we talked a little bit about that example of the car up front, and that's super relevant because you can see all of the different ways that somebody might consider getting to work on time. You know, and as a car company, if I'm where my customers are when they're first learning about solutions to problems they know they want to solve, I have a much better opportunity at actually engaging those customers and showing them that I know that I have a solution to their problem. So your job as a business, as a revenue stream focused business or revenue focused business, is to educate your customers, make them aware that you're available to solve their problems. You need to focus your messaging on them, not you. My biggest pet peeve, and what you guys see all the time, is customers talking about how they can help you, how they can help you, how they can help you. And all the messaging is focused on them as a business, them as a business. But what they really should be talking about is your problems, talking about it from your experience. Hey, we understand that this is the experience that you have. We're people too. That's an experience that we can empathize with and understand, and really focus on you as a messaging. To take that one step further, you need to be the expert. You need to research the cycle that your customers are going through. You need to understand what are the steps they're going to take in order to find you, in order to ask questions about you. What platforms are they visiting? Are your customers most likely to be on LinkedIn? Are they most likely to be on Instagram? And LinkedIn's really not somewhere where they visit. Are they more likely to ask people? Are they likely to look for case studies or testimonials? You know, do they require trials? Do they need to get their hands in the product? Where will they look? We just covered that. And is it available? So is it available from the standpoint of, is this something that other people are doing? Or is this something that only you're able to solve? Is it simple to use? Can it be touched easily? All these questions that we're asking. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to move it over to Chris to go more into detail on outbound prospecting. We'll talk a little bit about where to go from here and how to leverage some of the information that I've talked about at a high level. We've also posted the slides early in the presentation. So I know I moved through things fairly quickly. Like I said, it tends to be more engaging. But you should be able to leverage these slides, and we can open it up to questions at the end too. So Chris, I'm going to exit here and stop.
All right.
And and I'll go to you, and I will be in the chat to moderate.
Cool.
As you're going.
Thank you, Al. Everybody, let me know when you can see my screen here. Al, do you see my screen?
Yes, I do.
And it says an intro to outbound prospecting.
It does, and I'm gonna mute. Give me 1 second.
Okay, cool.
When you're ready for like questions and stuff, just let me know.
Yeah, just let me know as I come in. Cool.
Okay.
So again, thanks so much for having me, everyone. It's a huge pleasure to be a part of the Startup School again this year. So tonight, I'm going to be walking through a very brief introduction to outbound prospecting. And by outbound prospecting, I mean booking conversations or formal business meetings with people who don't know you and who do not know your company. So what Alishan walked you through was very much sort of an inbound model where customers are in active buying cycles and at some point they engage with your company. Now we're talking about companies who do not know you, do not know your company, and may not even know the problem that your solution solves for and whether or not they have it. So I also don't know what phase any of your businesses are in. So some of you might have fully fledged launch startups and you're actively selling. Some of you are likely still in the ideation phase or exploratory market research, and maybe you're just looking to book information interviews with people. So what I'm going to show you today is, regardless of whether or not you're selling, an easier way to book meetings with people who don't know you and who don't know your company, and a couple tips on how to have better conversations with those people after you've booked the meeting. So if any of you have ever tried to cold email or cold call people, trying to initiate sales cycles or conversations, you probably know how difficult it is to get a response from someone and how frustrating it can be when all of your emails or your phone calls go unanswered. The reason is because people's time is their most valuable resource, and they don't give it up very easily, and they don't give it up to just anyone. So there's a couple of stats I want to show you that kind of paints the picture for this. So the average open rate on a cold email is 15%. So this means if you sit down your computer, you've launched your company, and you send 100 cold emails to potential customers, only 15 of them are going to be opened, and probably only one of them is going to be responded to. So we really got to put in our work here to actually build relationships with people who don't know us and who don't know our companies. Our potential customers are getting 200 plus emails a day. We can think about all the emails we get as consumers, times that by 10, and that's how many emails you get as an executive at a Fortune 500 company. So to get your email noticed and read, there's a lot of things we need to do. On top of all of this, it typically takes between 8 to 12 touch points to get a response from a potential buyer. Most salespeople give up after the first touch point. So what we need to know here is that repetition and persistence is going to be super impactful and super important in actually getting these meetings with potential customers or people we want to have information interviews with. Now, that's all kind of the bad news here, but what I'm going to share with you is a couple tips that can make this process slightly easier. And we're going to start with email tips. So email is one of my favorite channels for booking meetings with people because it's fast and it's simple. But what I'm going to start off with here, and this, I'd love to get some interaction from the audience here. What I'm showing you here is an example of a typical sales email that I get almost every single day. Now, this one isn't bad. It's short enough. It's in bullet points. The format is pretty readable and it's concise. It's very close to a good sales email. But I would love to get some feedback from the audience on why you think an email like this went unanswered in my inbox. And now if you can kind of just man the chat there, if anything comes in, why would I not respond to this email? And if you got an email like this, would you respond to it?
Maybe because it was all about them and not about you.
Exactly. I don't know who just chimed in there because I can't see, but that's an excellent answer.
Shelby and Yassine says no identification of problem. Rock says it's not personable. Bikong says too much work that I'd have to do. Shelby says yes, that was me. So I nailed it. Steven says not personalized, not addressing benefits. Alexandra says selling on features, not benefits. A lot of pretty sharp answers.
Yeah, this is not the room I was expecting. I thought this was going to be people brand new to sales. Those are
subject line is too long from Ashley.
Yep. Yep. Okay, cool. Those are all exactly right answers. This is a really smart room. So to me, this is very much a spray and pray approach. So we can see that, it's got my full company name in there and their company name. That's pretty well a form fill. I can almost guarantee this is a mass email. Shelby, I think it was you said it's not personalized. It's all about the company. So they have not mentioned my challenges once, or what I might be going through as a company, potentially struggling with graphic design. Had they done any research on me, they would have never even sent this email to me. I'm a director of sales. I'm not a marketer. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm obviously not the one building our marketing assets. We have a marketer on staff who does that. On top of this, they included a link, helpful hint, do not include links in your first email. This ended up in my spam folder, and it's likely because they included a link here. On top of this, they know nothing about me. This email could have been sent to any company in the world. And as a result, it didn't get my attention. So incredible answers, lengthy subject line. I don't know who said that, but that's an awesome answer as well. And there's nothing compelling about this for me to actually respond. So, it sounds like everyone knows exactly what I'm going to teach here, but it's all about personalization and it's all about research. So what makes a good sales email? Good sales emails are driven by research. So, in these days where we do get 200 plus emails a day, it's the highly personalized emails that are going to get responses. So if you can show that you took the time to research a prospect and their business, it shows confidence that you believe your solution is right, or you wouldn't have dedicated the time to actually do that research and reach out. And usually this is quite comforting for a prospect, and it helps us really understand whether or not this is going to be a meeting that is going to be worth my time. So research driven. I'm going to touch more on this in a second. Second, is it focus on the recipient and their business? So someone mentioned this in the chat. This, I think that maybe was Shelby, is that email I showed you is all about the company. They didn't mention my business once, apart from like a crappy form fill in the subject line. They know nothing about me, or maybe if they do, they didn't show me that they know anything about me. It was a little bit lengthy too. So research shows that good sales emails that get responses are between 50 and 125 words. Now, this is not my research. This is data that comes from software vendors who create email marketing tools that measure which emails actually get response. And they have found that emails that are shorter and more concise are more likely to be responded to. So the rule of thumb is you're not going to count the words or use a word counter. 2 scrolls on a mobile device. So my advice is send a couple sample emails to yourself, open them on your iPhone or Android. And if it's more than 2 scrolls, then you're probably having your emails a little bit too long. Personalized subject line. So your subject line is almost the gatekeeper to whether or not your email gets opened. So highly unique emails that are so personalized that show that this email in no way could ever be a mass email are the ones that are going to get opened and the ones that are going to get your email potentially responded to. Lastly is give a strong call to action. So the email I showed you as a sample actually had a pretty decent call to action, but we need to make it very easy for our customers to either say yes or to no. So when you're booking meetings, suggest a specific day, a specific time, make it easier for the prospect to say, yes, I want to do this. I'm going to show you some examples of what that looks like, but the rule of thumb is make it research driven, focus on the recipient, keep it short, make it personalized, and have a strong call to action. So the first step to writing that compelling sales email is just doing the research. So you probably have 1,000,001 reasons why this person should talk to you, but those are your reasons and they're not the prospects. So the first step is really writing an email that is well researched. And to figure out who we should be sending our emails to, we need to understand who our ideal buyer is. So if you can take a moment now to just sit back and imagine in your mind, who is the ideal customer that I want to sell to? What industry are they in? How big are they? Are they growing? Are they shrinking? Did they just do layoffs? Do they host events? Do they have remote staff all over the world? What do they make? Think about these different things and try to understand who your ideal buyer persona is. And once you understand who your buyer persona is, try and think about in what situations they actually need your product. So for example, maybe you have like a catering startup and you specialize in high-end cuisine. Your ideal buyer might be Fortune 500 companies, maybe it's banks, but banks who host a lot of events and who may need a catering company. Maybe you sell software. Maybe, for example, you sell Google Hangouts, the tool that we're on right now. So your ideal buyers and their ideal situations might be tech companies who have offices all over the world, who have remote-based employees, who may ultimately need a sales conferencing software like the one we're on right now. So thinking about your ideal buyer and these situations where they need your product most will help you understand who you want to start reaching out to first. So a couple of ways that you can figure out who your ideal buyer is or where to go look for them is, look at their company website, look at the products they offer, look at their mission, look at awards they've received, look at their executive priorities, check out LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is an awesome sort of source of data. We can figure out headcounts by department. We can figure out what individual buyers we may want to talk to. We can look at growth rates. We can look at the job postings companies are posting, and those can really tell us a lot about the company. You may want to look at press releases. So look for quotes from executives, look at events they're hosting, look at products they're launching. So there's a ton of different ways we can do research on our buyers. And the research that we do is going to help craft the messagings that we use in our emails. So I'm going to use a live example.
Hey, Chris, one sec.
Yeah.
Question from Shelby. This is great for B2B. What if we are selling to end users?
Good question. So kind of leaning back on what Alishan was talking about earlier with customer interviews, I would likely try to figure out what consumer is your likely buyer. Think about who your low-hanging fruit is. Who are the people who are going to be most likely to buy my software or my service or my product? And then interview them and understand what traits or what characteristics my ideal buyers possess, and then figure out how to find those online. So it could be that you set up trackers on Twitter or you use Google Alerts. So any way that you can find people online that possess those qualities. Most of this presentation is sort of around B2B sales, but there's a lot of tools you can use that are going to help you uncover personal characteristics that will help you identify who your ideal buyer is.
Yeah, so I think, Shelby, just to add on to what Chris is saying, most companies selling to end users aren't outbound prospecting, in that you're not going to the customer to engage them in a sales cycle. Really, you're working to let your customer understand that they have a problem you can solve. So we're really going back to knowing your buyers and being where they are from a research perspective, so that you can put your content there, so that you can put your copy there, and ultimately they can make the decision to engage with you, because there's no time to try to reach out to individual end users directly usually. And another question, Chris, is how would you frame a request for an information interview? That's a really good question because we're talking a lot about it. So how would you do that, Chris?
Yeah, excuse me. That's a good question. So framing a request for an information interview, usually people are more likely to respond to a request if you can tell them how they will help you. So have a very specific ask when you're reaching out to that person, and say, hey, I'm looking for some advice on XYZ. I noticed on your LinkedIn you're a specialist in XYZ. I would love to kind of just pick your brain for about 15 minutes here and understand your perspective on a product I'm working on. Back at Level Jump and back when I was forming my startup, our ask for information interviews was exactly like that. It was, I noticed on LinkedIn you specialize in sales training. I'm working on a solution designed for sales trainers. I would love to get your perspective on what I'm building. So tell them how they can help you and frame it as a request for help. And if you can, try and figure out how you can add value to them. If potentially this is, happy to open up my network and introduce you to anyone I know who might help you. Just try and show how you can help them as well. But the easiest way is just ask them for help. Can I get your perspective on something I'm building? Love your feedback.
Yeah, and for those of you guys who have gone through Psychology 101, which I would be willing to guess that a majority of you have, there's a very, very famous study done that a lot of Psychology 101 classes talk about, where there's a long line for a photocopier and somebody walks up to the front of the line and says, hey, he says one of two things. Hey, can I cut in front of you? Or, hey, can I cut in front of you because? And what they found through the course of that study was when you add a reason for asking something, even if it's as simple as, hey, can I cut in front of you because I want to make a copy, your chances of actually succeeding go up exponentially. I can't remember the exact percent, but it's far higher than 50%. Closer in that 60 to 70% range. So to Chris's point, it's really important that when you frame an ask for an informational interview, that you give a reason, number one, why you're asking for it. Chris's example about, hey, I'm building this product and I'd love to get your feedback on it because you could add value is really great. But you also have to make sure that if you do that, you don't start selling to that person. That is sneaky, and you have to make sure that you're staying in the realm of what you've asked, unless they take the conversation in that direction. The worst thing you can do is say, hey, I'd just love to get your feedback, and then be like, oh, like, you know, would you like to buy this? It'll get you some pretty bad blood. A couple more questions here, Chris.
Sorry, just to touch on that one. That mistake where you try to turn an information interview into a sales conversation, I've made that mistake many, many times. And what I found to be effective is if you can take the feedback that they gave you during that information interview, build it into your product or show that it had some influence on how you designed what you're offering, circle back to them 6 months later and be like, hey, you know, I took your feedback to heart. I implemented it into my product. Can we book another call to see if this is something that you may actually use or add value to you or your workflow?
Awesome. Okay, you can use. So question from Mo, and I think this one's a pretty easy one for you, Chris. Does this model apply when selling to government or related entities? Do you want to take that one real quick?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I assume it's the exact same model. Most government entities have profiles on LinkedIn. Their employees are on there. They've got a ton of information and data around them. So yeah, I wouldn't imagine this is very different than a traditional B2B model. You know, I have some experience selling into the government at my last startup, although it's a ton of corporate red tape and there's a lot more hoops you need to jump through. People are motivated at government institutions in the same way they're motivated at a private company. You know, it's really about understanding the pain or the gain for that individual, and then mapping your solution to how you can help them in their job or help the company or the government organization. So I think the same principles apply.
Yeah, just as an addition to that, you know, I think what Chris is talking about, what I talked about earlier, it's really easy to forget that that people on the other end of the phone are also people, or at the other end of the Zoom or on the other side of the table. And I think for sellers, or for buyers, it's very easy for them to forget that we're people as well as salespeople. We kind of get this strange taboo type relationship, but we're just trying to make this human, right? Making sure that you have something that can help somebody accomplish something. They have something that can help you accomplish something. So if we could take that more human approach to prospecting, to selling, we're going to find a lot more success in finding people that are very much in the same position that we are, even though, you know, we're doing slightly different things at that time. And that's it for questions, Chris. So you can definitely continue. Thanks for answering those.
Cool. Okay. So because I believe in practical examples, so I'm going to give you some examples of how I conduct my research before jumping into emailing companies and trying to get meetings. So a little bit of a level jump. So we are a sales training platform. We work with fast-growing companies, and we help them onboard and train new sales reps faster and with greater consistency. So when I think about who my ideal buyer is and the companies who I want to reach out to first because they're the most likely to buy my software, I think about companies who have high headcount growth. So I look for companies who are hiring a lot of sales reps because my platform trains sales reps, and the more sales reps are trained, the more money we make. I look for companies who might have just raised a significant venture capital round. So typically this is Series C or Series D raises. Usually with an injection of capital, companies go to grow their go-to-market teams, which means sales and customer success and marketing. I also look for companies who have a dedicated sales trainer or a dedicated sales enablement person because I need someone at the company to target and to sell to. I look for companies who are constantly launching new products. If I find a company and they seem to be launching a new product every 3 or 4 months, I know that they're constantly retraining their sales reps on these new products. So I'm going to show you how I do some of that research. I'm going to be looking at a company called Newsela. And fire off any questions here, because I know what I'm saying right now is a very specific example to my world that may not apply to a B2C model or similar models. So feel free to jump in. But when I target a company, first I go to their website. And I look at the website, I check out the solutions they offer. I look at the company values. Typically, I go look at any press releases. So press releases are awesome for things like product launches or for venture capital funding. You know, I can see that this company landed a $50 million investment from the same investors at Spotify, so TCV. So, you know, I'd look at this. I would read the article. I'd probably look for a couple quotes. I may look for other press releases around launching new products. So if I'm on their website, I see that this company has launched new solutions that they'll likely need to train their sales reps on. So to me, this is a compelling reason to reach out to this company because the sales trainer at this company is always training on new products. I may also go into LinkedIn and I can go and I can look at how fast companies are growing. So because I work with hyper growth venture-backed companies, I want to look at how fast specific departments are growing in the company. And on LinkedIn, you can get all this information. So I can see that the sales department is growing at 12% year over year here. I may also want to look at the company's job postings. So I can come in here, I can see who they're hiring for. I can look at the filters and I can see, okay, great. This company is hiring 6 salespeople. If they're hiring salespeople, it means they're training more. So these are all data points that I want to look for in order to understand whether or not this company fits my ideal buyer persona and is worth me investing the time in emailing and cold calling and trying to book meetings with. So eventually what you get is something that looks very similar to this. So
real quick question.
Yep.
I think that's super relevant before you continue is how did you know to look at Newsela to begin with?
Good question. Yeah, it's an excellent question. So you can run filters on LinkedIn. So if I go into LinkedIn and I go into click, what's the best way for me to do this? If anyone here has LinkedIn Navigator, I'm going to show you a bit of a tool right now. And then, this is a paid tool. So I don't want to show a lot of tools that you won't be able to use, but I believe standard LinkedIn does this as well. So you'll be able to run reports based on headcount growth or based on company industry or based on geography. And this is how I put my lead list together. So I may look for companies who are in North America. So I put North America in here. I would go look for companies who are in in technology. So I put technology into here. I would go look for people who have sales trainer in their headlines. I would look for headcount by department. I would look for sectors that they sell into. I would use all these filters to put together a list. And what it would spit out is a list of companies who fit my ideal buyer persona. There's a couple other tools I'm going to touch on that will help show you this. But essentially, you could use LinkedIn for this. You may want to look at like Inc.'s 50 or 500 fastest growing companies. You may want to find any blogs that have put the companies that you want to target into a category. Just try and figure out different ways that you can potentially create a list of companies to go after. Could be LinkedIn Navigator, could be blog posts aggregating companies, could be companies like Zoom Info that aggregate data. So I hope that's a good enough answer that kind of satisfies that. Al, was there any follow-up to that question?
No, that was a good answer. I think your buyer persona will often inform where you're going to be going to look for your customer. So if you can see Chris's ideal customer persona, high head count, raise venture capital, have a dedicated sales enablement or sales training role. So even as simple as something as putting into Google companies that have raised venture capital in the last X amount of months will probably yield him enough results to understand a few of his customers. Chris is very, very adept at prospecting. So, he's got LinkedIn Navigator and he really thinks through his prospecting in quite a lot of detail, which is what you guys are seeing here. But it definitely can be a little bit more simple and you can kind of build on your processes as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good answer. And there's a couple of tools that I'm going to show you in a second that will aggregate a lot of this research for us and it'll make your job a lot easier. But here's what we found looking at Newsela. So we found they raised a pretty big Series C from TCV Partners in March. They've got a ton of job postings on LinkedIn. They've got about 120 sellers on the sales team. They launched some new products in January in 2020, and they've got a ton of people on sales training and enablement. So I want you to pay close attention to this slide because it's going to come back a couple times when we're crafting our messaging. Now, these are the tools that I mentioned that are going to help you aggregate your research. So Google Alerts is free and it's super simple to use. So Google Alerts is going to allow you to track any keyword mentions of anything on the internet. So I set up Google Alerts to track venture capital Series D. And then every morning I get a list of articles or blogs where the keyword venture capital Series D was mentioned. So I can start my day by prospecting into these companies that Google Alerts have set up for me. You can set them up for any keywords that you think might relate to your products. Feedly does the exact same thing. It's going to track mentions of certain keywords. Owler does the exact same thing as Google Alerts and Feedly. They're different UIs and they're different subscription models. I would recommend starting with Google Alerts. Set up keyword trackers for anything you think might relate to uncovering a need for your product or service. And then eventually look into LinkedIn or look into LinkedIn Sales Navigator, because this is one of the best sales tools out there. Cool. Okay, so we've gotten our research done. So let's start to look at some actual email templates that we can use to send out messaging to our customers. So this isn't something I came up with. This is something I picked up from probably one of the best sales trainers in the world, this guy, John Barrows. And his theory on emailing is to use a why you now model. So we're gonna fill in this template using the research we just learned, but it's a template like this that you can use to just really kick off your prospecting strategy. So we got the recipient's name. I was researching your company on LinkedIn and notice reason number 1. So plug in reason number 1 here. And I'm reaching out because I often hear how challenging it is for insert their role so it feels customized and personalized, at venture-backed companies to, and then insert the challenge that you think your solution resolves for. And then the second paragraph, the body of this email should be your value proposition and how it relates to resolving that challenge that you outlined here. Then you've got a strong call to action. So if this is interesting, how's your calendar for next Friday, 2 p.m. for a 15-minute conversation? So let's see what that looks like with a couple of these points subbed in. Subject line is going to be something customized to them. So your recent Series C with TCV partners. If you're a recipient of this email, you're opening that email because that is a compelling subject line. This is not a mass email. This is clearly a salesperson who has done their research on you. Neil, I was researching New Zealand on LinkedIn and I saw you just raised a big Series C round with TCV partners. Congrats on the growth opportunity. I'm reaching out because. So this is that story Al told about saying the word because when you're butting in line with someone at a copier is going to help you get better results. Use the word because. Because is a trigger word and it signifies in the recipient's brain to pay attention. So whether you're speaking or doing a presentation or you're writing emails, the word because is incredibly powerful. So this is where we sub in that challenge. So I understand it can be challenging for sales trainers at venture-backed companies to understand the best way to cut ramp time for new sales hires. Here's our compelling value proposition. So sales trainers at companies like XYZ use Level Jump to uncover onboarding metrics that help them get reps to quota 50% faster. So whatever value prop you can sub in here that relates to the challenge you identified in that first paragraph is how you're going to get emails that will resonate with a buyer. I'm going to pause here. Does anyone have any questions about how we can use a simple template like this to sub in our value points that we got from our research to create a very simple email that is personalized, contextual, and that has a subject line that's going to get you an open?
Chris, can you, so I was just actually typing an answer for you while you were trying there, but Chris J, can you just give a quick understanding of what Level Jump does?
Definitely, yeah. So we're a sales training platform and we're built inside of Salesforce. So most venture-backed hypergrowth companies have dedicated sales trainers or sales coaches that will train all of their new hires on their product, on their skill set, on the sales process and all the tools the company uses. And we sell software to them so that they can use our software to better train all of the new hires at the company.
So Chris, just to add on to that, Chris's question was wondering if you were offering sales training as a service that are now outsourced as opposed to doing it in-house. Level Jump offers no professional services. They are a technology that allows you to essentially hyper accelerate your ability to train reps using your own data and your own Salesforce instance. Yeah.
And I want to be clear that this is not like a hidden sales pitch in disguise. We only work with like companies that are 1,000 employees or higher. So definitely not a sneaky sales pitcher.
Yeah, and John Cruz is asking, what if your because was wrong, Chris? Is there an opportunity to represent a different one that might work better?
Yeah, exactly. So what we've got here is 5 research points. And because that initial point that I said, it takes between 8 to 12 touch points for a customer to respond, our initial because may be wrong. So then what we're going to do on the second email is we're going to talk about job postings, or we're going to talk about how many sellers they have. And we're going to change that because. So we are going to change the challenge based on subbing in these posts. So essentially, these are 5 different emails we got here, 5 different things we noticed about the company, 5 different becauses, 5 different value props, or 5 different challenges. So what we're building is a cadence of 5 emails or 5 phone calls that we can use to make sure that one of these points hits home with them. Because it could be that maybe this guy actually isn't going to be using their Series C investment round to hire people. So this may not resonate with him. But if I hit him with the launching new products, maybe this is more relevant to his world. And on email 4, he's going to respond to me. So we're building 5 different reasons we can reach out with 5 different challenges and 5 different value props.
And Chris, how do you personalize a message to a consumer to buy my services for their parents?
Okay, that's a very specific question. So how do I personalize a message to get consumers to buy a product for their parents?
Yeah. So
Cool.
it's a little bit tough. And I would actually just ask the question back, is this a consumer product or is it a B2B product? Because I think those go back to an inbound strategy versus an outbound strategy. What Chris is talking about here is definitely going to be an outbound strategy where you're actively, it's a text speaker for a consumer product. So Adriana, in this case, I would actually refer back to focusing on understanding your buyer, knowing where they are, and putting the advertisements and the messaging on the platforms where your buyers are, and essentially helping them understand why they have a problem that your product solves. So this technique that Chris is talking about, you're likely not going to send direct personalized emails. You might be more inclined to do marketing email blasts that are focused on like discounts or a specific time of the year where your solution is going to solve a bigger problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. This model is probably doesn't lend itself well to individual B2C prospecting. But for any reason, if you did want to take that approach, like Alishan mentioned, understand your buyer persona and understand why or why not would these people buy the product for their parents. And then understand the reasons why they would buy it, and then put those reasons into an email.
Chris, what is the next step if you don't hear back from a customer?
Good question. Your next step is to send email number 2 and say, hey, I noticed you have a ton of job postings for sales roles on LinkedIn. Typically, companies hiring for a lot of sales roles struggle with XYZ. So hit them with the second email. You may also want to pepper in phone calls in between these. So email 1, then a phone call. Email 2, then a phone call. Email 3, then a LinkedIn message. So we'll only be talking about emails and phone calls today, but I will touch on like how to run an effective cold call. But if you don't hear back, send a different email with a different subject line and a different value prop. The one thing I see reps doing all the time that is a big mistake is referencing failed attempts. So if your email goes unanswered, your second email should not be, hey, I emailed you and I noticed you didn't get back to me, but I wanted to talk to you about XYZ. If they ignored you, move on. Do not address that they ignored you. Just hit them with that second email. Always provide value and never reference failed attempts.
Chris, how did you decide to go after a Series C or D, et cetera, company?
Yeah, good question. So this is nothing that I really decided on my own. Level Jump has been around for a couple of years, and we've understood, what the ideal buyer persona is based on like headcount growth or based on just data. So we look at historical data from like 2 or 3 years ago, which deals closed, which deals did not close, and for the ones that did close, what qualities do those deals that have closed possess? So if you're lucky enough to run a startup where you have customers and you've been selling actively, just look at the qualities that your customers possess and then go find lookalike companies. So that's what we did. We looked back at all the companies who bought Level Jump, and we found that majority of them fell into a Series C or a Series D investment phase.
Yeah. So again, this is what we're talking about here in this presentation. Neither of these things is mutually exclusive to one another. Chris is talking about building a buyer journey and understanding who their buyers are so that they can actively make sure to solve a problem that they already know they have. Chris's emails and all the customers that he's working with are because he knows that they have a problem that once he makes them aware of that problem, he has the right solution for. So he's doing a really good job at that. Jason is asking what your open rate is, Chris, and if it's above 15%. And what is a reasonable amount of time spent collecting data versus the open rate?
Yeah, excellent question. So to the second point first, the reasonable amount of time to spend doing the research is about 15 minutes. So as I scroll through these tabs here, once you get comfortable prospecting, you can probably find those 5 key points in about 15 minutes. Do not spend longer than 15 minutes on this, because if after your first email, they get back to you and they say, hey, we just launched a partnership with your biggest competitor. Sorry, we're on contract for 3 years, and you've wasted an hour doing the research. It's not a good use of your time. So max it out at 15 minutes. For open rates, yeah, it depends on the campaign. Some of my sequences or my email campaigns have an open rate of like 70 or 80%. And that's simply because the subject line is personalized. So if you reference something very specific to them or to their business, your open rates will be much higher than 15%. That 15% is typically for mass email campaigns where there is no reference to you or anything specific about your business.
Yeah, a lot of people get stuck in research loops because they're afraid to actually send a cold email or to pick up the phone and make a cold call, which is totally fair. Rejection sucks, guys. And we know that. Chris and I know that firsthand. We both used to knock on doors in big suits in the rain trying to sell photocopiers to businesses. And that definitely hurts. But you just got to do it. You can get to a point of oversaturating your research, and then ultimately you just got to admit, hey, it's time to go here. Dior asks, when you email again, do you reply to your previous email, Chris, or do you send it as a brand new email?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I don't know the answer. I've done both. So I use a tool called outreach.io, and Outreach helps me structure my sequences or my emails in a flow so that I don't forget to send them. Sometimes I set them up so that I reply to the email, so it has the re. The re used to be like a trick sales reps used to use. So they would change their subject line to re, and then they'd put the subject line so it looks like there was a response from the customer. That doesn't work as well anymore. So I actually don't know. I don't know. There's no right or wrong answer. My advice would be to test both. What you don't want to do is have 5 emails where it's a re, and like you've got 5 unanswered emails. I'd recommend maybe not. If 2 emails don't go responded to, I'd probably start a new thread so it doesn't look like. If they see that they've ignored you, they'll probably continue to ignore you just based on trusting their gut instinct from 2 weeks ago when they first ignored you. So I don't know, but I'd recommend if you're going to respond to, if you're going to reply to your own emails, cap it at 2 or 3.
Guys, there's nothing more frustrating. I mean, I'm the CRO of a company. I get cold emailed every single day, and being on both sides of the coin, I can tell you there is nothing more frustrating than someone trying to trick me into a conversation. It is sneaky, and even if there's a solution, they have a solution that can absolutely help me 9 times out of 10. I would even actually say 10 times out of 10, I am absolutely not speaking to them because it's sleazy, it's sneaky, and if there's an opportunity to chat, be authentic and be honest. I think a few people are agreeing here, but none of this, what we're teaching you or what we'll ever say is going to be, use tactics that are meant to trick people into responding to you. Mm-hmm. Chris, how often can we target the same person? If we email them, how long do we wait until the next email? That question's from Tally.
Yeah, good question, Tally. Again, no right answer, but research shows that every 2 to 3 days is the right scheduling for a sequence. Now, it could be that day 1 is email number 1. On day 2, maybe you leave them a voicemail or you try to catch them on the phone. Then day 4, you send the next email. And then maybe that afternoon you cold call them. So there's no real answer, but for emails, I would wait between 2 to 3 days per email, but I would also pepper in phone calls in between those emails so that you're still top of mind with them.
Guys, new data shows that it takes 18 direct contacts to book a meeting with the right buyer in some industries. So, if you don't hear back after 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 emails, don't give up. Keep going. As long as you're adding value, don't worry that you're bothering somebody. You're only bothering somebody when you start to send emails like, hey, are you under a rock? Or like things that are easily ignorable. But if you continue to add value, chances are that if it's something that's interesting, your buyer has gone and done their research themselves as well. Right? We talked about that educated buyer. So Chris, I think you're good to continue now.
Cool. Okay. Thanks. All right. So a couple tools that you can use to send your emails. So these are paid tools. Actually, Hunter is free. But yes, we're in Cirrus or paid. They have free trials, but I would recommend looking into these tools. So if you're going to be doing a lot of email prospecting, these tools will tell you when a customer has opened your email and how many times they've opened it. They also have templates. So if you continue to use a template kind of like this one here, you can put the template into directly into your Gmail or into your inbox so that you're creating these emails a lot faster. But most important is the open rate. So if Hunter or Yes or Cirrus tells me when a customer has opened my email, typically that's a good time for me to call them because I know they're at their desktop or I know they're on their phone. So I'd recommend looking into these tools to use templates and to track whether or not your emails are getting opened. It's also going to give you a ton of data on what subject lines are actually getting your emails open, so you can optimize, you can A/B test, and do all those great things. All right, so that sums it up for emailing. So like I said, these are—
Sorry, one thing. A couple of people have mentioned HubSpot. Yeah, it's a good point, guys. HubSpot is not on here. This list is not exhaustive. These are tools that Chris and I have definitely used more than other tools. Sorry, HubSpot is a good tool if you like the user interface. These tools are actually bolt-ons, so they fit on top of Gmail a little bit more smooth than HubSpot does. That tends to be a little bit more of a standalone. It's not that you can't use it. It's just that these are the ones that we would probably recommend for general use across everybody because they bolt onto Outlook as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I do love HubSpot, but the only time I've used the HubSpot inbox mail tooler is when we've had a full HubSpot marketing automation solution. So I'm not even sure. I guess maybe there is a free HubSpot that you can just bolt onto your Gmail. It's a great tool too. But yeah, like Al said, there's hundreds of these out there. So this is not an exhaustive list. It is, it's 7:30 right now. Cleo, I don't know if you're on the line right now. Do we typically do breaks? I think we could probably wrap this up in about 30. So maybe I'll leave it.
I wouldn't do a break then. I'd say just keep it pushing.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to move into cold calling. Cold calling sucks. There's no two ways about it. Getting hung up on, having people be rude to you on the phone. It's super, it's almost humiliating sometimes, but cold calling is such an effective tool when done right. And it's such a horrible experience when done wrong. So what I'm gonna walk you through is just a very simple format you can apply to your cold calls so that you're not getting hung up on and hopefully you're booking meetings. So here's just quickly what not to do on a cold call. And I see reps do this all the time. Do not waste time on pleasantries. When you're cold calling, and I recommend you do your cold calls, like block off an hour and hammer out cold calls all at once. But when you finally get someone on the line, don't waste time with, hey, how are you today? How was your weekend? How are you loving the weather out there? These are strangers, get right to the point. Be respectful, but get to the point so that you're not wasting anybody's time. But when I say get to the point, I don't mean immediately jump into your value prop. Don't sit there and spill, the 5 or 6 different reasons why they should use your service or why they should buy your product. You literally have about 30, 35 seconds to capture interest. So don't spill your value prop immediately. This last point may seem kind of counterintuitive or just kind of wrong. So don't sell your product or your service on the cold call. The point of a cold call is not to sell your product. No one is buying any solution based on a 35-second cold call. The point of a cold call is to sell time. You are selling the next meeting. So if you get someone on the phone on a cold call, all you're trying to do is to get them to commit to a 15 or 30-minute conversation with you at a later date. So keep that in mind. You are not selling your products on cold calls. You are selling time. You are selling a meeting with you. So I'm going to break down the anatomy of a cold call. And again, this is based on research, but it's different for every person. Make it your own, add your own flair. If none of this works for you, drop it and try something new. But this has worked for me. So a good cold call should be permission-based. So people always want to feel like they're in control. So when we open up our cold calls, we need to give them the opportunity to opt out. And usually that sounds a little bit like, hey, I know I'm catching you off guard here, but do you have 30 seconds for me to explain why I called? So give them an opt out. People don't like getting cold calls. And if you give them the possibility to say no, if you give them the option, if you give them control, they're more likely to be receptive to your message. Good cold calls, just like our emails, are driven by research. So rather than getting a customer on the call and spilling our value prop, we want to ask them something compelling about their business that we uncovered through our research phase. We also want to incite some form of back and forth interaction. We don't want to sit there and have full-on discovery and introductory calls with our customers on cold calls, but we want to have some sort of back and forth interaction, and we can do that through an open-ended question. And like I said, we are selling time. We are not selling products on our cold calls. Lastly, be respectful. Cold calls, like I said, they suck. They suck to get. They suck to do. Just be respectful of your buyers, and if they're rude to you, just say, hey, okay, sounds like my solution is not for you. Have a great day. Be respectful in your cold calls. So I'm going to break down what this cold call structure might look like. And again, I'm going to do this in the context of Level Jump in a second. So, introduce yourself. It's name. I'm calling from my company. Use your full name. And research shows that people who use their full name on cold calls are more successful. And that's simply because, important people use their full names when they introduce themselves. Get permission. I know I'm catching you off guard here, and this is a cold call. Do you have 30 seconds for me to explain why I called? You can make jokes out of this on the intro, be like, hey, this is a cold call. Everyone hates getting them, but do you have 30 seconds for me to explain why I called? Explain the reason you called. The reason for my call is XYZ research. I just noticed you raised a round from TCV Ventures. Typically, I see companies who have raised rounds struggle with XYZ. So this is almost a very similar format to that email structure that I showed you earlier, except this is something we're verbalizing when we've gotten them live on the phone. And have a strong call to action. If this is interesting, do you have 15 minutes next Friday for me to share how we've helped similar companies in your industry with this? So let's look back at this research. Remember these slides, that first point. Let's bake that into an actual structure here. So it's going to sound something like, hey, Neil, it's Chris Ray calling from
real question. If somebody hangs up on you, do you call them again, or is that person removed from your list? How do you handle that? That's one that people get all the time.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I used to have a sales manager who was all about hammering the phones, and he would always say, if you get hung up on, call them back and say, hey, we must have gotten disconnected there. Like, as if you're it's kind of a spiteful way of calling them again. But I recommend just drop it. If they don't want the cold call, they don't want the cold call. I'd probably advocate email, maybe a LinkedIn message instead of a cold call, because this is obviously someone who does not want cold calls. Al, what do you think of that? Are you similar sentiment or different?
It's a tough one because sometimes people cut you off, you call back, and it's a pleasant conversation. But sometimes you get an irritated person. Like I said, I think it's a tough call. I think it could go either way based on you as a person and your preference. The only thing I would say is if somebody hangs up on you and you decide to call them back, definitely don't be rude. Try and cut that with a little humor. I used to be one of those guys that called people back, and my line used to always be like, hey, I think I might have hung up on you by accident. And that's really funny to most people because obviously they know that they hung up on me. So I definitely got a few conversations from that, but sometimes, it can backfire and the person says, no, I hung up on you and hung up again. And at that point, you kind of your losses.
Yeah, one of my favorite sales trainers here in Toronto, David Premier, always says, sell the way you want to buy. And I know that if I got a cold call from someone and I hung up on them, which I would never do, but if I did hang up on them, I probably wouldn't want them to call me back. So practice empathy, put yourself in the buyer's shoes, and just do what you think, sell the way you buy. And if you don't think that you would want to get cold called 5 times by the same person in a day, don't do that to other people.
Yep, it's totally fair. Chris, another question here. So if you say, so you don't say at your convenience, but you give them a specific date in brackets, which might not be good for them.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would never say at your convenience. So, it's a lot of people do say things like that. I find that when you say things like, hey, whenever's convenient for you, it changes the power keel. The best sellers view themselves on the same power keel as the buyers, and they view themselves as more consultants than salespeople. And when we start to use this, what's the word I'm looking for? This passive language, like, hey, I would love to jump on a call whenever it's convenient for you. I will accommodate my schedule to make sure that it works for you. We start to feel like a greasy salesperson, or we start to look like someone who feels their time is not as valuable as the buyer's is. But in reality, if your startup, the solution you're selling is valuable, they should be asking for your time because your time is incredibly valuable. So I would never say something like, whenever it's convenient for you. Lead with a specific date and a time. And if that time doesn't work for them, but they want to take the meeting, they'll suggest a different time.
Yeah, I think it's super important to remember, guys, that you're not doing people aren't doing you a favor by talking to you. It is a mutual relationship. It's not an alpha beta. It is a mutually beneficial in that if somebody's bleeding and you have a Band-Aid, you're like, hey, I could sell you this Band-Aid, you could stop your bleeding. That works for both of you. But if you're like, hey, if it's convenient for you, you maybe want to talk to me about maybe letting me help you stop bleeding, that's weird. So if you frame it in that way, and ultimately you shouldn't be talking to people that you can't actually help in some way. I mean, that's not really why we're here, or what selling is. If somebody has a TV already and you're selling them a TV and that's the same size and the same technology, you can't really help them. However, if somebody is looking for one and you can help sell them one, again, there's a mutual benefit. So if you think about it that way, you'll also give yourself a lot more confidence in your ability to have those conversations back and forth with your prospects.
Yeah, if you respect your time as much as you respect your buyer's time, the buyer will respect you more. Cool. Any other questions there, Aljon?
Nope, you can keep going, buddy.
All right, so you might be asking, well, I don't have anyone's phone numbers, so where do I get their phone numbers from? I recommend checking out ZoomInfo, Lucia, or LeadIQ. So these are data aggregation tools, and I can go punch in someone's name into ZoomInfo, and it's going to spit out their contact info, so their phone number, maybe their mobile phone number, and likely their work email. So this makes prospecting so much faster because we don't have to go call into switchboards or call the office main line or hit the info@company.com. So use services like this to find contact information. I believe Lucia has a free component to it. I think ZoomInfo does as well. LeadIQ, I think, is paid, but there's a lot of tools out there that will aggregate contact info so that you're not spending a ton of time calling wrong numbers or calling company switchboards. Cool. Okay, so at this point, we've likely booked a few meetings with our future customers or our informational interviews. But what do we say on these actual meetings to make sure that we're getting the best use of our time and our customers' time? So because today is a super short day, we only have an hour and a bit. I'm only going to focus on tips that are going to relate to the first 5 minutes of the meeting. So how you open a meeting is incredibly important because people form first impressions within the first 30 seconds of a meeting, and how you open the meeting is going to dictate the tone for the rest of the meeting and whether or not the customer is receptive to your messages. So a bit of this segment requires you guys to actually do some work. So get ready because there's going to be an interactive component to this. So the first tip is plan your rapport. So what is rapport? So rapport is essentially the small talk that we do with customers or with people we've gotten on the phone. It's the small talk before the business reason that we're both here. Now, rapport is the best way to build trust, build credibility, and to create a relationship with someone. But it's also important because business should be fun. It should be human. We should be getting to know our potential customers as individuals and not just as the companies that they work for. So I hear this old adage all the time that people buy from people they like, and it's very much true. And the best way to get someone to like you is to build rapport with them that is meaningful. So I'm not talking about getting on the phone and talking about the weekend or talking about the weather plans. Like that's rapport that they can have with their barista at Starbucks in the morning. We want to create compelling and meaningful rapport with our buyers so that we enter into these business conversations. There's more trust, there's more credibility, and there's kind of like a little bit of a friendship that's starting to blossom here that turns these business relationships into more than that. So A couple quick tips. So what is good rapport? So good rapport is usually built within the first 5 minutes of the conversation. And there's a lot of data that supports that rapport should happen at the beginning of a conversation and at the end of the conversation. So let's leave the business conversation to the middle and let's have some fun at the beginning and at the end of the meeting. Good rapport uses I language and not we language. So if you find that you're getting onto a call with a potential customer and you're using a lot of we language at the beginning, you're probably talking about your company instead of yourself. So we want rapport to be about you as an individual and about your potential buyer as an individual. And it's research driven. So the biggest challenge with rapport building is actually starting it. But we can use LinkedIn and we can use Twitter. We can use a lot of tools that will help us uncover compelling, open-ended questions to ask our prospects about in order to build rapport. So LinkedIn, we can look at their career choices. We can ask them why they entered into a new industry. We can ask them why they took that in school. We can ask them about their interests or their volunteer experience if they've got that on LinkedIn. We can look at their summary. A lot of people write really great summaries about them and their career journeys. And there's a lot of really good things we can pick apart in the summary section of someone's LinkedIn profile that's going to help us build meaningful rapport with them. Twitter also is a really good source of rapport building information as well. The one piece of advice I'm going to leave you with on rapport building is start rapport with an open-ended question that is about them. People love talking about themselves, and usually they're happy to do it, and it's a great way to start a conversation. If you're going to pull something off of Twitter or LinkedIn, the most important thing to remember is reference where you saw it. It's super creepy if you pull a tweet that they did a year ago and you say, hey, I noticed you like cats. Like, what's your favorite cat? Like, make sure you're like, hey, I saw on Twitter you posted a hilarious cat meme. Like, are you a big cat person? Do you have cats? Like, make sure you reference where you saw it, or it can come across as a little bit weird. Cool. Any questions about how to build good rapport?
You're good.
Awesome. So we are going to jump into some live examples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this LinkedIn profile into the chat, and then I want you guys to actually go into this LinkedIn profile and tell me what you would use, how you would initiate rapport with this person. How do I copy this here? Al, what's the best way for me to get to the chat? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay, so if everyone can look at the chat, holy crap, there's 75 messages. I would love for everyone to go to that person's LinkedIn profile and figure out how you would initiate rapport with this person.
Chris, while we're doing that, just keeping an eye on time, we might want to just stick to one example.
Sure. So I'm going to open this profile here. For anyone who's not at their laptops or not able to access LinkedIn, let's open up this guy's profile and tell me what you would use to talk to him about, to open the conversation. So his name's Kyle. He works at Drift. He's got a really strong about section here. So there's a ton we can pull from the about section. You can also look at his career history, whatever post he's made on LinkedIn. Is there something funny he's commented on? Is there something that he's published as a thought leader in the space that we can make a comment on? He's worked at a bunch of different tech companies. He has worked at what looks like maybe a not-for-profit. He is co-founder of a baby food company. He took, he's got an MBA in finance. So there's a lot we can work off of here. I'd love to hear what people in the audience think they would have led with when building rapport with Kyle.
And mute for you, Chris. So Ed actually has a pretty good one, and so does Yassine. Both of them they both say that they would use a mutual connection to make an introduction.
Interesting. So I like the mutual connections. It's a really good approach. But the challenge is with so many different, with so many people that we add to LinkedIn whimsically, I don't even know half the people on my LinkedIn list anymore. So you kind of run the risk of coming on and being like, hey, I noticed you know Bob from XYZ company. Like, how do you know him? And that person would be like, oh, I don't know. He randomly added me to LinkedIn one day. And then there's just silence. So you have nowhere to go from there. And then you're like, oh, well, cool. You want to talk business? So I like that approach. There's a lot of risk to it though.
Starter Pack says, I noticed on LinkedIn you started a baby company. Tell me how you got into that industry. And Frida says she would ask about his founder experience.
Okay, founder experience, love that. Someone said the baby food company, love that as well. Anything else?
Somebody's curious what sports management is, just genuinely curious, not overly relevant to this. Oksana says he has kids, so I can ask why he founded that baby food company. Dior says, I noticed you went to school in San Francisco. What was your experience living there? Natasha says, I would talk about Joel Peterson. So a few different options there. Okay, cool. Yeah, these are all phenomenal rapport building techniques. Let's see what I went with. So I've never done this. This is me on the live call with the customer, and I had planned my rapport in advance. I've never kind of done this showing my voice to like 80 people. So, you know, be gentle. Well, hey, Cal, it's good to finally connect with you here. So I did a quick LinkedIn search on you before jumping on this call. And as a fellow ex-entrepreneur, can you tell me a little bit about Big Dipper Baby Food?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my it was my wife's company, and she, you know, have you heard of like cold pressed juices?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Evolution Fresh. They have a Starbucks, all that kind of stuff. So it's like what that is pasteurizing the juice using like the water pressure equivalent to like being in like the.
Cool. I'm not going to show the entire clip here, but the point is, I went with the baby food company example, and we had like a 4 or 5 minute dialogue about entrepreneurship, about why some businesses fail and some succeed. And I got to learn a little bit more about his family and his home life. So this creates a really strong, meaningful connection with a potential buyer. And I can guarantee average sales reps are not having these types of conversations with someone like Kyle. So this went a long way, helped build the relationship. So congrats to whoever mentioned that baby food example, because that's what I went with as well. And it worked super well. I got another example here. I don't know, Al, I think we're tight for time here.
Yeah, just want to leave enough time for discussion or questions. All
right, let's chug along here then.
More, yeah.
So my other tip for having compelling conversations with people you don't know is after you've built rapport, have an open-ended start to the meeting. And, you know, so there's nothing more frustrating than jumping on a sales call with someone you don't know and just not knowing how to transition into that business discussion. You know, the last thing you want to do is dance around who should be leading the conversation or kind of tiptoe around why you wanted to have this conversation with that person in the first place, whether this is a sales conversation or an information interview. So the real secret here is just tell them why you reached out and ask an open-ended question. So kick it off by explaining why you reached out to them. And that's using those 4 or 5 bullet points that you uncovered during your original research. And literally you can read them off and say, hey, Kyle, I noticed XYZ about your company. Was it one of these things that prompted you to take the time to talk to me? And that's the open-ended question. Give them those reasons and ask them, was it any of this that made you want to take the time? So there must have been something about your email or about your cold call that incited enough interest in the recipient to spend half an hour with you. Like I said, time is the most valuable resource any of us have. And he would not have taken this meeting, or she would not have taken this meeting, if there wasn't something compelling about what you said to them in that email or that cold call. So it's important to find out what it was about your outreach that encouraged them to actually make the time, because that's going to tell you a lot about the challenges or the potential opportunities that you have with this business. So looking at this slide again, we've got these 5 points. You can literally rattle them off in a meeting to open the conversation. I'm going to show you what that sounds like here. Neil, good to connect with you. The reason I had originally reached out, you know, we work with fast-growing Series C, Series D companies who are scaling and onboarding and hiring people in cohorts. So what I'm seeing from you guys is, you know, just LinkedIn data. I saw you have about 50 open roles for sales on LinkedIn, so you're hiring fast. And I know you guys raised a pretty significant round last year from TCV. That sounds like you got about 100 sellers that you're supporting. And from what I can see on LinkedIn, that the enablement team seems pretty strong. So, you know, I'm curious if it was any of those things, that the rapid growth and the accelerated headcount, that prompted you to respond to my email and spend the time.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we have hired like crazy, and you know, a big thing that our board, TCV specifically, are really interested in is like rep productivity.
So this is a first interaction with someone who I don't know. And like I said, if we can tell them the reasons we reached out, show them all the research we did, and ask them what the reason they took the time is in that open-ended question, they start to spill a lot of details about the companies, about the challenges they're going through, about their growth, or really whatever's relevant to your solution. So it's helping them start the conversation by just asking an open-ended question. That's it. If there's no questions about how to open the meeting, I'll do a quick recap here. Al, is there anything in the chat?
There is not right now, sir.
Cool. Okay. So that's a quick recap. Research is the foundation of any good outbound sales strategy. If we can do our research and uncover personalized reasons that we can put into an email, we're much more likely to get high open rates and high response rates on our outbound prospecting, whether that's cold calling or cold emailing. And ultimately just have fun and build trust with your buyers by building rapport at the beginning of a conversation. It can make every other aspect of a sales process much, much easier if that person trusts you and likes you. And lastly, open the meetings by telling them why you've reached out and ask why they took the time. It's the simplest way to start the business conversation. That's it for me. I'll kick it back to you to talk about where to go from here.
Awesome. So if you want to just click through to all the bullet points. I think there's a lot of overlapping stuff that Chris and I talk about, right? And I think what's really interesting here is that so my company is a $2 million company that we have built up 100% from inbound, from focusing on understanding where our customers are, how they research, what do they care about, what are the journey possibilities for them through our application, and essentially how do they want to interact with us to purchase. And on the flip side of that, you saw what an outbound strategy looks like from Chris to really focus on reaching out to your customers and letting them know that there is a problem that you can help them solve. So kind of getting them into that funnel a little bit more proactively versus waiting for them to find you. Regardless of which approach you take or where you are in your business life cycle, there's some key takeaways that we really want you to focus on. The number one takeaway is understanding your customer. Who are they? Where are they? What do they care about? And I think that's a question that we can constantly be asking ourselves as our business develops. This is not just a startup mentality. All of the best companies in the world are always asking themselves, who are our customers? Where are our customers? What do they care about? I really personally admire Nike. So I know we've had some consumer-based questions here, and Nike is one of the companies that I constantly look at as inspiration. Walt Disney Company, Pixar, those are companies, Paramount, that I also look to for inspiration because they're always asking those questions. Who are our customers? For Nike, if you look at Nike's branding through the year and how it's developed, you just have to look as far as the models they use in their advertisements. They've gone from primarily white males, and now if you look at Nike's website, they use more unisex individuals, people that can appeal to multiple demographics. There's very race fluid, very ethnicity. Their ethnicity is very fluid as well. And that's them trying to keep asking that question of themselves of who are our customers? Where are our customers? If you look at Nike again, you can see them. They've grown from print to TV to the internet. Now they're all over Instagram. I'm sure you'll see them on TikTok soon. Everybody's talking about the Play Inside campaign that Nike's running with their athletes. So they're constantly evolving the where are our customers strategy. And what do they care about? You only have to look as far as Nike's quarantine marketing campaign, which is Play Inside, play for everybody. You want to be an athlete, you want the world to take notice, then what you should be doing is staying inside, playing inside for everybody. So obviously what we're caring about right now is global health, making sure that we can all come out of this together, stay connected and work for each other. And Nike's the biggest example of a company that really, really continues to ask itself that question about its marketplace. And as startups, as companies that are growing, we can all benefit tremendously from constantly asking these questions. Next, create your journey possibilities for your customers, right? So your customers don't only have to come in through your inbound channels. They don't only have to come in through your outbound channels. You can do a combination of both. You can do advertisements where your customers come in through Instagram and directly go through your sales team. You can have an e-commerce process for your customers. You can absolutely cold outreach to them. You could go to conferences. So think about all the ways that your customers can go through their journey in interacting with your organization, with your product, with your service. Not everybody buys the same way. So you should be understanding that you have to sell to every single person in the way that they want to buy if you want to be as successful as you're going to be. Experiment. We're not geniuses. We can't say, hey, this is all the ways that people are going to buy my product or service and interact with my company. And in knowing that we can't have those silver bullet answers right out of the gate when we're starting, we have to go out and figure them out. And the only way to figure them out is to experiment. Don't be afraid to fail. Try, fail, try again, fail, find something that works, and then keep doing that and keep trying new stuff and failing. Now, a lot of what Chris talked about has a lot of years of practice from him perfecting it. I've seen Chris try hundreds, if not thousands, of variations of the different cold calling emails, of the different cadences, of different technologies. And he's one person that's really mastered that. A lot of people look up to him in that way. These aren't tips that he just developed randomly or through one time. He's failed a lot. Chris, no offense, but I think we both have, and it's really important to understand that experimenting and making sure that you're trying stuff is really key to driving your success. Don't be afraid to fail. And then finally, build your funnel. Focus on all customers, whether they're at the bottom of the funnel closing deals with you or they're at the top of the funnel, just experimenting, trying to understand whether or not the problem you solve is something that's important to them. Build that up. You need people at every single stage of that buyer journey in order to be healthy, in order to continue improving your business. So the slides are shared. There's a ton of really good takeaways we hope for you guys that you can action, and some examples that you can use to inspire your own individual processes, especially from the techniques that Chris shared with you. Chris, would you add anything else there for where to go from here?
No, that's it. Just for anyone who's just getting their feet wet in sales, it can be extremely frustrating. It's tough. And like Al said, experiment all the time. Experiment with talk tracks, experiment with email formats, change your subject lines. Always be changing something and optimizing. But the most important thing is tracking results. So pay attention to open rates, pay attention to your response rates, pay attention to conversion rates on stages in your buying process. So always be using data to help drive your experiments. And happy selling. I think that's about it.
Any other slides? I don't think we have any more, right?
This is Batman.
Yeah. So there are a few questions, a few comments, and we can go into those, and I'll read them out. And we can kind of trade answering them, Chris. So the first one is, do you start with a cold email and then follow up with a cold call, or do you just choose one method to approach?
Sorry, can you repeat that for me?
Do you start with a cold email and then a cold call, or do you just choose one method to approach?
Yeah, good question. There's no right answer. Everyone tries something different. The one I personally advocate for, sending an email first, so that way we've kind of warmed up the prospect. And if we've written a well-researched and a compelling email, hopefully they remember it, so that when I phone them, they recognize my voice. And if I need to, I can reference that email. But again, there's no right answer, but I would try doing the email first and then doing a call the next day or that afternoon.
Chris and I are different in that way. I absolutely am a call first person and then an email. So either way, it works. That's partly personality based. That question was from Natasha. Dior asks, do you think this process is applicable to businesses outside of North America? Wondering if there's a cultural consideration in sales.
Oh, good question.
I'll take that one first if you want. Yeah. Yes, I think the easy answer is yes. You always have to be considerate of other people's cultures. One of the biggest things that I learned over my career is that not everybody communicates the same. For example, one of my biggest clients is Estee Lauder in Hong Kong. And in every email, they constantly are showing appreciation, gratitude. Their language is very thankful. And that's not something that we see from customers, for example, in Israel, who are very direct and straight to the point in their communication style. So I think that the process at its core definitely applies, but the language you use, the way you communicate with people, you absolutely have to be respectful of people's cultures and consider them as individuals and as people. Like I said, if you went over to your friend's house who was of a different culture, you would absolutely be considerate of their traditions and the way that they choose to live their lives. And it's no different in sales for me, Chris. I don't know if you would agree.
No, I would agree. I don't have a ton of experience selling internationally. I do a lot in the UK, but it's pretty similar to here. So no, I think that was a good answer. One thing to think about when we're talking about being respectful and showing empathy in our sales processes, with COVID, there's been a lot of changes in how my team prospects. So I wouldn't recommend using that same email style in the next month or so when reaching out to people. I would probably try and be more empathetic and recognize that people might be in different situations. If you are jumping on a call with someone, your rapport is likely going to be around COVID and just making sure everyone is safe on their end. So just something to note when thinking about kind of different selling climates is COVID has kind of changed the way that my team approaches their go-to-market strategy.
That's a good point. Thanks for the nice comment. Oksana said she's really glad she chose this training she had 2 topics to choose from, and Chris, you personally learned and reinforced many of her points. So thanks for that comment, Oksana.
Thanks.
Ed says, out of curiosity, how many cold calls and cold emails do you send out on a daily basis with proper research per client before sending out at a 15-minute pace? Just curious for numbers, Chris.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I was at Salesforce, our SDRs, their only job was our SDRs and BDRs, and that's sales development rep and business development rep. All they did was make cold calls and send cold emails. And I believe their activity targets were around 100 a day. So logging 100 emails or logging 100 calls or mixing those together. I don't do a lot of outbound prospecting on my own anymore because I'm more selling to active customers. But I would probably aim anywhere for between 50 to 100. But again, what you should be looking at is your conversion rate. So if you have been selling for 3 months, look back on your historical data and understand, it takes me 50 activities to book 1 meeting. I have to book 10 meetings to get to 1 demo, and I have to have 10 demos to get to 1 customer. So break down your conversion metrics and kind of work backwards from there to understand how many activities your SDRs, your BDRs, or you should be doing every day in order to book enough meetings to get to enough demos, to get to enough paid customers if you have a demo phase in your sales cycle.
That's a great answer, Chris. If a prospect agrees to an information interview, would you offer them a free trial of your product as a thank you, or is this a no-no to minimize coming across too salesy?
Good question.
I personally, I think the way it depends on the way the call goes. So I've done that in the past and it's gone extremely well. But again, it's not from a standpoint of sales. It was, I had a really great relationship, and I asked the prospect to dig into the product a little bit for me, just to find out, just to give me a little bit more feedback if they were open to it. So it wasn't necessarily as a thank you. It was as a continuation of the research if they were open to it, and it was very much a if you don't mind kind of conversation. It's a delicate balance, Chris. That's probably what I would say. I don't know if you would disagree with that, Chris Gray.
No, I agree. And that's an approach I would advocate for all the time. In the early stages of your startup, get your product into the hands of many users as possible, because your best feature enhancements, the iterations on your product, they're going to come from your customers. So, don't be afraid to give it out for free. But to Al's point, actually, it's a slippery slope. I would use your own discretion and kind of feel out whether or not this is the right person to do a free trial. And maybe I would call it a free trial, kind of like Ali Sean mentioned. It's like, could I get you into my product so I can get your perspective on how the product functions? And maybe that's a good way to phrase it.
Yeah, I think guys, like what those types of questions really highlight for us is that sales is not just a science and it's not just an art. A lot of what we talk about is the ability to kind of put a formula around sales or create a science from it so that it's a little bit more digestible. At the end of the day, there is that discretion aspect of you're a human talking to another human, you're building a relationship, there is going to be small things like, do I trust this person? Do I like this person? Is this person attractive to me? Does their voice sound appealing to me? All of those non-verbal cues, verbal cues, body language, those all play into whether or not you're successful. You can do other things beyond this. If you folks are interested, there's a YouTube channel. It's called The Art of the Charm. And it talks a lot about why certain celebrities are so charming and lets you understand what are the small things that they do that create trust and actually make them likable. So that's a good kind of complement to this kind of science-based approach to selling, because ultimately, if somebody likes you, they're far more likely to work with you, to want to continue to talk to you, to want to help you, versus if they really don't. Ravi, all of the links to our slides are at the top of the chat. I know it's a long one, but definitely Chris's slides are in there. Dior asks if there are any books you would recommend. Chris, I'll let you take that one first.
You're the book guy, but my favorite sales book is the Sales Acceleration. What's Mark Robert's book called? The Sales Acceleration Formula. So it's written by the ex-CRO of HubSpot, and it is an entire playbook on how to grow a sales team. So it talks about hiring the right people. It talks about how to coach them, how to onboard and ramp them. It talks about inbound marketing, your strategy for getting warm leads. My favorite book is The Sales Acceleration Formula by Mark Roberge. Or Getting to Yes is a good one. I also like How to Win Friends and Influence People. But if you're going to pick one book, Mark Roberge, The Sales Acceleration Formula.
I like to, personally, I like to read biographies of people that I admire and look up to, because I think that the story aspect gives me a ton of contextual information as to why they're successful. And there's often really, really, really good practical examples of what they did and how it applies. And you can make that relevant. So Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, his book just came out. That was incredible. Ed Catmull, his biography, which is called Creativity Inc. He's the president of Pixar. That's a good one. Shoe Dog, Phil Knight. That's a really good one. I think business books can be boring, but definitely relevant. So some of the ones that Chris mentioned as well, I've read and definitely recommend. What's the other one? Challenger Sale, Sandler Selling. But I think choose books that you're going to be interested in ultimately, because those are the ones that you'll retain the most information from, we find.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Going back to that book comment there, I like sales books too, but I find that I kind of get bored really quickly. So go for audiobooks and go for sales podcasts. Audiobooks I can listen to at 2x speed. I love doing that while I'm walking down the street. And there's some awesome sales podcasts out there. I would listen to Sales Hacker would be my #1 recommendation for you.
Nice recommendation. Yeah, that's a good one. Oksana asks, are you going to be conducting more courses here? If they invite us back, we'll definitely come back.
We always invite you guys back. Come on now.
Yeah.
John asks, in terms of sales activities, what would you say would be an appropriate split in time, say between CRM, prospecting, emailing, cold calling, etc.?
Yeah, good question. Again, no straight answer. If you're just getting started with your business, I'd say dedicate 100% of your time to outbound prospecting. And once you get bogged down in actual customer meetings, maybe you scale back your prospecting. But I don't know. It depends on where you're at in your business. And if you're a small team and you get pulled into product discussions or marketing discussions, it's going to change. But my recommendation is to just make the most out of your prospecting time. So dedicate specific blocks in your calendar for only outbound prospecting, and then be true to your calendar. It's so easy to put these blocks in and just steamroll over them. But prospecting and filling the funnel is what's going to drive the growth of your business. And it's easy to skip, but if you don't do it, you're going to hit a growth slump. So I hope that's a good enough answer.
John, one thing that I would add to that, and it would be outside of the context of sales activity, is that remember that in a day, you only have so much cognitive capacity to complete activities, whether that's prospecting or being on phone calls with clients or being in meetings with colleagues, or even things like spending time with your family members, kids, partners, etc. You only have so much cognitive capacity. So prioritize the things earliest in the day that are the most important, that require the most mental effort. That way you can actually make sure that you focus your attention on those. So to be more specific with your answer, maybe prospecting takes a lot of effort for you. So I would prospect first thing in the morning, and I would schedule client calls later in the afternoon, because those are relaxing. My clients are really great. They're easy to talk to. But if I happen to have a challenging client call at 9 a.m. in the morning that sucks up a lot of my mental effort, it's going to be really difficult for me to prospect later on in the day. Same thing with administrative activities. They're typically low mental effort, low mental energy. So scheduling those for the end of the day will really give you an opportunity to make sure that you're effectively completing all of your tasks. It's a little trick that that you guys can use. Yassine Chris asks, do you leave voicemails?
Yeah, good question. I do. And my advice on voicemails, and I got this tip from John Barrows, the trainer who I referenced a couple times. When you're leaving voicemails, leave your name at the very end of the voicemail. Because if you call and say, hey, it's Chris Gray calling from Level Jump, they're going to delete that. But if I call and I leave voicemail, say, hey, reason for my call is I noticed you raised a Series C investment round. Typically, I see Series C companies struggling with XYZ. They will listen to it. Do not start with your name. Leave your name at the end. Caveat is remember to leave your name at the end, because I've left a lot of voicemails where I strategically did not say my name at the beginning and then I forgot to say it at the end and then they didn't call me back. So leave your name at the end so that it captures their interest and they listen the entire way through.
Good point. Good point. What tools do you recommend to track LinkedIn messaging and reach out campaigns? LinkedIn messaging, I would just use LinkedIn for tracking that messaging. Reach out campaigns, you can use whatever CRM tool you're using, HubSpot, Salesforce, Pipedrive, possibly ActiveCampaign. I mean, realistically, any tool that you're reaching out in, you should be able to track the campaign as long as you're using a campaign-based tool. Gmail, Outlook, those are not good tools to be tracking your campaigns because they don't archive them relevant to the contact. So lots of technologies. I would probably dig into researching that a little bit more based on what your need is. And that was a question from Tally. Ed asks,
hold on.
Do you
Ed, one thing I want to add, when you're thinking about tools for doing your outbound prospecting, I definitely advocate look at Outreach.io, SalesLoft, and Mixmax, because those are incredible outbound sequencing tools that will structure everything I talked about today in one flow. So it could be day 1 email, day 2 phone call, day 4 email, day 5 LinkedIn touch. It will structure all those in a schedule, and then it will remind you to do those tasks every single day so that you're not mixing up who to email. They're expensive tools. If you've got the cash, buy them.
Yep, that's a good point, Chris. Sorry, Outreach is a great tool. I really definitely agree with that. More questions. Ed asks, do you use staff to do the research process to minimize or eliminate the 15-minute research time?
We've used, in the past, I've used, SDRs and interns, honestly, sales interns who just want to understand a little bit about sales. So absolutely, you can get people, if you train them well enough and they understand the space well enough and they understand why people will buy your product, yeah, you could have people do the research for you. You run the risk of jumping on that first call with them and then not being as well versed in their company as maybe you should be because someone else did the research. But yeah, hey, if you're looking to save some time, I've done it. Yeah,
good point, Chris. I'll won't comment on that one. Dior says this is one of the best trainings she's ever attended. Thank you very much. Shelby says thank you. Oksana says thank you. Thank you so much. Chris, do you have any other YouTube channels or video recommendations that would be good for those who don't have time to read? I'll just start that by saying Cerebral Selling is one of my favorite YouTube channels and favorite LinkedIn channels. David Premier, Sell the Way You Buy, is really a consumer-first salesperson, and really takes the viewpoint of the buyer. So if you have time to listen to his content, I would recommend it.
Yeah, my one recommendation is gong.io. So Gong is a sales tool that records every conversation you have with customers. And as a result of that, they have all these data and analytics on what keywords drive results on calls, when you should have rapport, when should you talk about pricing. So they put all this data behind sales conversations. They aggregate that data, and then they send out blogs and webinars and YouTube videos on how to effectively run your sales conversations for the best results. So if you're going to look at one thing, gong.io is my favorite recommendation. Anything that they create content-wise is gold.
Yeah, it's steeped in data. I really love Gong as well, and I think they accomplish a couple of different things. David is very much a, again, that actually highlights the presentation in a nutshell for us, Chris. David is very much a high-level, focused on people, understanding them to create sales, and Gong is very data-oriented so that you can have a very logical and clear definition of what approach you're taking. So both in combination, definitely very good practices. Jason asks, have you read Chris Voss's book using lines such as, have you given up on this project yet? Or his work on the psychology of no? Yeah, Chris, I have read a little bit of that book, and have you given up on this project yet? That is moving towards strip lining, which is a whole different conversation in my opinion. And it's delicate. You have to use lines like that very, very carefully. People tend to overuse those. And this is a little bit of a sensitive one, but I like to think about that particular concept in terms of dating. So for example, somebody blows you off over and over and over again, even though they're text messaging with you. And then you say, hey, it doesn't really sound like you're interested in hanging out. I'm just going to, stop messaging you. And that person might say, yeah, it's not a really good time. Or they might say like, no. I just been busy. Let's hang out. In the first case, if they say, yeah, it's not a really good time. And then you say, okay, well, like when would be a good time? You've kind of taken away your power of the strip line and that power of no, because you've gone back and you've shown that you're not really willing to walk away. If you're going to use lines like that, you really have to be willing to walk away for it to be effective, or you really lose all credibility of that person ever coming back to work with you in the future. And that's super important. I see it being overused and poorly executed on constantly by sales reps, and it's super frustrating.
Yeah, I second that. Strip lining is it's very delicate. My advice on a strip line, if you're going to use a line like, hey, have you given up on this project? I would make it a little bit softer. Like, hey, customer, we had a lot of really good interactions recently. Haven't heard back from you in a little while. I'm getting the impression that maybe this isn't top priority for you anymore. I'm happy to pick this up in 5 months from now if now is not a good time for you. So just give them an out. Doing a strip line is just all about giving them an out. It doesn't have to be like, hey, I'm ready to walk away from this. You could just be like, hey, I'm happy to park this project and revisit in 6 months if that's a better use of your time. And that way they can just be like, yeah, you know what? I got too much on my plate right now. Let's touch base in 6 months.
That's a good point, Chris. I'll just reiterate, be okay with walking away. If you are going to give that person a signal you're going to walk away, don't stick around. Be ready to actually leave that conversation based on what you've said to hold on to your credibility. Natasha says, thank you, Natasha. I appreciate that. Oksana, where do we sign up for notifications about your courses? We don't have any courses per se. We build them as we go, as we get invited. So no notifications, but I'm sure Cleo will let you know if we're going to be back.
Yeah,
go ahead.
We'll throw our LinkedIn profiles into the deck somewhere, and feel free to reach out and add us on LinkedIn, and then you can keep in touch with us. And then anything we do in the future, we'll keep you posted. Yeah.
Starter pack. How important is a personalized domain name when sending out emails as opposed to Gmail for your own business? I answered this a little bit earlier. I'm not sure if you saw this starter pack, but it's super important to have a domain name if you're prospecting consumers. One, Gmails end up in spam. B, Gmails don't have any legitimacy associated with them. It could be fake. People are less trusting of it. There's no way for them to actually go and research you. So I would say it's extremely important. The first thing you need to do as a business is make sure that you can drive some legitimacy. People can research you. They can see that you're actually a real company. If they can't, there's no way you're getting a response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my advice, go on to upwork.com, get a website created, or make your own on Shopify or on, Squarespace or whatever. Buy the domain, $12 a year, and then buy an email provider for $5 a month. So these are all pretty low cost things that are going to completely change whether or not you get responses. I echo Al's sentiment on Gmails. Yeah.
Aida says, great lecture. Thank you so much. Would you have any opinions on dropshipping model sales? Does it still work, or is it oversaturated? I'll take that first. I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I've never done a dropshipping business myself. I think they're super cool though. And I think companies like Shopify and Volusion and WooCommerce and Squarespace have made it really easy to create these businesses. So, hey, I like them, and there's a lot of tools to make it easier. So that's my 2 cents, but no, that I've never done a dropshipping business myself.
Yeah, so dropshipping, I think any of those questions like model, it's not that it's oversaturated, because ultimately it's about the product that you are dropshipping. So I would more be asking yourself, is the product that I'm dropshipping creative? And if you're talking more about dropshipping as a business, you have to look at the competitive marketplace first. Look at companies like Shopify and look for your differentiator. What's going to make you different? What's going to make companies who sell products and use dropshipping as their method to get it into their consumers' hands more likely or less likely to work with you? And if they have a company, why would they switch? So, no real specific thoughts, just overall more business focused comments. Ed asks, do you also add your clients to Facebook as well as LinkedIn? I normally like to add them when I've met them face to face at trade shows and events, but I was curious if you found success in this and any concerns or points to consider when adding prospects to both platforms.
I probably would not add prospects to Facebook. I think Facebook is more about being personal. It's more about being social with your friends, your family. I find LinkedIn is the business app. I'd probably advise not doing the Facebook thing, but hey, everyone's different. What do you think?
I would agree, unless you've built like a connection with them that goes beyond business. There's some sort of personal relationship that you managed to create in a short period of time. That's probably where I would draw the line. I definitely don't add my prospects to Facebook either. And some of my customers, I've gone and visited them and had dinner in their houses, and I still feel a little bit awkward about Facebook. So that's up to you. I think that's a personal call.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
John, thanks. Chris J, now that we have to communicate virtually, I'm considering Skype, but Microsoft 365 Business has Teams, SharePoint instead of Skype. Your thoughts and experience on using these tools for prospecting, other resources, tools you may recommend over these. Chris J, myself, we've been a remote company, Goose Chase, for the last 10 years. So we've been doing remote before all this has happened. And I can tell you that the tool itself needs to just function for your own use case. We use Zoom because we find that the interface is easier and more people have familiarity with the tool. It's very rare for us to find a client that uses Skype or Business Office 365. The majority of customers that we work with are Google Docs and Zoom. So we mirror our customers' technology to make it easy for them to work with us. And I think that's a key consideration whenever we're evaluating technology for our business is, do other customers adopt these technologies if they're facing our customers? Super clutch, because then it makes it really easy to connect without a learning curve, without people having to download new technologies onto their computers, et cetera. So, if your customers use Skype and SharePoint, then you should be using Skype and SharePoint. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Chris.
No, I think that was an excellent answer. My advice is what you said, Zoom. Zoom is free up till 45 minutes. So just make sure your sales calls aren't longer than 45 minutes, and you can use that for free.
That's a good tool. That's a good tip. Couple of Ravi says thank you. Alexander says thank you. Thank you to both of you guys. Aida says thank you. Thank you as well. Yassine says thank you. Frida asks when to send a LinkedIn connection to prospective clients after the initial cold call and email.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, no right answer, but I would say if you've had one meaningful conversation with them, add them to LinkedIn, grow your network. It helps from a marketing perspective too. So maybe you have a discovery conversation or a first meeting with them and they don't convert to a customer, they don't advance to the next step in your sales process. If you have them on LinkedIn, every time you share a piece of content, every time your company announces something, they'll see that. And eventually, if it resonates, they'll reach back out. So I would say the earlier, the better. And like, what is the harm in adding them and they don't add you back? Like, no big deal. I would take the shot.
I would agree. LinkedIn is a bit of a crapshoot. Again, like the key is, are you providing value with your ad? I have a lot of people that reach out to me on LinkedIn that have no idea. I have no idea who they am or who they are. I've never met them, and there's no note. It's a little weird. I mean, but on the flip side, when people are like, "Hey, the reason I'm adding you is because X, Y, and Z," it definitely gives me way more incentive to add them. That's the truth. So up to you, but add value. Just, wherever you go, whatever you do, make sure you're adding value. And I think that's a general good lesson to live by as human beings. Try to add value in other people's lives. Cool. So a couple more thank yous from Ed and Chris. We really appreciate every one of you and everybody coming to our presentation and sticking around all the way till 8:20 on this, just another day in quarantine. I'm sure you guys have lots to do, lots of work. We really appreciate it. End of the month. Please feel free to add us to LinkedIn. A few of you guys have already found us, and we'll be happy to respond, answer questions as necessary. But we feel appreciative and grateful for the opportunity. So thank you to Startup School as well for inviting us back. Chris, anything to add?
No, this has been a real pleasure. There's been some incredible questions. This is a really, really smart group. So it sounds like you guys have been trained super well in the last startup sessions. And I appreciate all the thank yous and all the really nice comments. This has been an awesome experience for both of us. So thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a good night, everybody, and fill out your surveys.
Fill out your surveys.
Yeah. Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye.